The wildfires raging through the western United States have reignited the debate around climate change and its impact on the environment. Municipalities are scrambling for answers, including Los Angeles County, which has retained the global consultancy Buro Happold to lead a team undertaking a climate vulnerability assessment that will identify the people, places, and systems in the county's 88 cities that are most susceptible to escalating climate change impacts. Joining us today to discuss this initiative is Sabrina Bornstein, Associate Principal and Head of Climate Resilience at Buro Happold, and a former Deputy Chief Resilience Officer in the City of Los Angeles Mayor's Office. Sabrina, welcome.
Thank you. Good to be here.
Let's start by a simple question. Why was Buro Happold chosen to lead this studies team?
Yeah, so there's a lot of great work out there on climate risk and vulnerability. And so we put together a team that had quite a bit of existing experience and to build off of the knowledge that already existed around some of the key vulnerabilities from climate change and climate impacts. We wanted to acknowledge that we're not starting from scratch with this work and wanted to build off of that expertise. So we brought in, for example, a partner to work with us, a nonprofit that's been working for many years on climate resilience in LA County. We brought in a partner to work with us who had worked on existing infrastructure assessments related to transportation for the infrastructure vulnerability assessment. And then we've also are working with subject matter experts who can help advise and provide input as we move forward with the approach. Then Buro Happold, we led the consulting team for the Our County Sustainability Plan. So we worked with the county and a team over many years to help develop that vision for what a region-wide sustainability plan would look like, one that was based on collaboration and leadership in the County of Los Angeles and working with the 88 cities that are also in the county.
Okay. What's going to be the study's methodology? In other words, what's the best way to capture the impact of climate change on people, places, and systems? And what's the time frame of this study?
Yeah, so it's going to be a one-year project that we just kicked off, and it's anticipated to be ready or released summer of 2021. The first step when looking at climate impacts is to start with exposure. So there's quite a bit of climate science out there looking at what are the different projections for different climate hazards. In California, the fourth climate assessment was released in 2018. And so there's quite a bit of data in climate science that looks at projections for different emission scenarios. So one path would be a more moderate emissions scenario, and another path would be a more extreme emissions scenario. And then looking at what are the future predictions around or projections around heat or precipitation, for example, based on these different pathways, and then looking at it for mid-century and end of century. So that's really the starting point. But then there's how do we then apply that to understanding locally what are the impacts and what does that mean for, as you said, people, places, and systems. So the next step, once we look at the different exposures, flooding, extreme heat events, wildfire, for example, coastal flooding, we then look at what is the sensitivity. So that would be the sensitivity of different populations. So for extreme heat events, for example, those who don't have access to air conditioning or who may have underlying health conditions may be more sensitive to the impacts of extreme heat. So you'd want to overlay that to then understand where are the greatest impacts going to be. Similarly, where are the more sensitive or older infrastructure systems that may be more heavily stressed by these increasing extreme events. Then once we have an understanding of those impacts, we then look at adaptive capacity. And that's considering there may be strategies in place already to cope with these increasing impacts. So for example, again, with extreme heat, which is something I focused on quite a bit at the City of LA and is something that is impacting us increasingly here in Los Angeles, we look at things such as tree canopy or access to cooling centers or other publicly available air-conditioned spaces. Is it more impervious land that may exacerbate urban heat island, or is there more tree canopy and shade or cool roofs that can help reduce the impact of the extreme heat events. And so once we layer all of these different aspects and look at the different data, that can help us identify where and who and what is sort of rises to the top in terms of most vulnerable, and can also help inform opportunities for strategies and actions and solutions.
Let's talk a little bit more about that. You know, does the study's agenda include actionable recommendations, and what weight are those recommendations likely to carry in terms of enforceability?
So this is a first step. We're just looking at the climate vulnerability assessment. Similar to when we look at putting together a climate action plan, the first step there is a greenhouse gas emission study to understand what are our activities and where do we, what sort of is resulting in the greatest emissions to help inform what our climate actions are. Similarly here, we're starting with a foundational piece of information in terms of what are our future climate risks that are going to impact communities, what are the disproportionate impacts, and having that really be the foundational piece to then inform the next step of planning action. And so in this case, part of the scope is not to then put together the actions, but to provide this foundational piece, not only for the county, but also for the 88 cities. So the planning action level can really happen on a local level, but be informed from this consistent methodology for the region.
Mm-hmm. How will this study contribute to the county's larger Our County Sustainability Plan, whose origins date back to 2016 and which Buro Happold helped craft?
Yeah, so that's where this project is actually the result of two of the actions in the plan. So the plan itself had two actions to look at both social and physical vulnerability. And in fact, I should mention too that we'll be looking at the interactions between the two and the secondary or cascading impacts, understanding that there is a strong relationship between the physical and the social, and we need to consider that when looking at the scope and approach. But in terms of implementing the strategy and plan, I've been working now in climate sustainability in the LA region for the last 10, 15 years. And we've seen this shift of initially focusing much more on climate action and mitigation work. And there's been a real desire from communities and from people in this world asking for us to start planning more and preparing more for climate change. So we've seen in the past few years, and especially, I mean, this year alone, it's sort of, you're constantly seeing unprecedented new records. And so there's this desire and request and urgency around planning for these impacts that we're already starting to see are here, while we still plan to do as much as we can to reduce our emissions as well and make sure we're slowing down that curve. So the sustainability plan, and just generally, what our work we do really encourage a holistic approach, one that looks at both mitigation and adaptation together. And this work can help identify implementation of other actions as well. So for example, something such as considering where transit stops should be located with additional shade or climate resilient design. There's a lot of sidewalks that don't have shade or transit stops that don't have protections. So where are the locations that might make the most sense to prioritize additional sort of interventions or solutions that take into account not only where is it going to be hot, which I think is oftentimes what we sort of default to, is where is it going to be the hottest, but also to consider where is there a greater need from social vulnerability, as well as where is there a greater need based on looking at the existing physical infrastructure and built environment where there might not be as much adaptive capacity already in place.
Well, this couldn't be more topical than it is right now. I wish you good luck with this, and we'll be keeping an eye on how your initiative and your study progress.
Great, thank you so much.
And thank to our audience for watching. This is John Caulfield of Building, Design, and Construction.